letter was written in crayon, tucked inside my granddaughter's shoe. I found it on a Tuesday morning in September, crouched on the porch of a farmhouse I had never wanted to visit, looking for the left sneaker my granddaughter swore she'd left by the door. The paper was folded 4 times, the handwriting shaky and deliberate the way 7-year-olds write when they're trying very hard to spell something right. It said, "Grandpa Ray, don't go in the red barn. Nana says that's where bad things stay forever." I held that note for a long time. My name is Raymond Coalfield. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as an electrician in Columbus, Ohio, raised 2 boys with my wife Carol, coached Little League for a decade, and thought I understood the world reasonably well. I did not understand the world at all. Let me go back to the beginning. My son Daniel had married Patricia Marsh in 2014. They met at a work conference in Cincinnati, got engaged after 8 months, married after 2 years. Patricia was quiet, careful, the kind of woman who thought before she spoke and apologized when she didn't need to. I liked her. Carol loved her. When their daughter Lily was born in 2017, I thought Daniel had built exactly the life I'd hoped for him. The cracks appeared slowly, the way they always do. By 2022, Daniel was calling me late at night, voice tight, telling me Patricia had become withdrawn, unreachable, that she spent whole weekends at her mother's property outside Chillicothe without explanation. Her mother, Evelyn Marsh, a woman who had smiled at their wedding with the warmest eyes I'd ever seen, and somehow still made the hair on my arms stand up. I could never explain that feeling about Evelyn. She was perfectly pleasant. She brought food when Lily was born, remembered birthdays, sent cards, but something in the way she spoke to Patricia, the way Patricia flinched almost invisibly when Evelyn made suggestions, the way her posture changed whenever her mother walked into a room. I mentioned it to Carol once. Carol told me I was reading into things. Maybe I was. The divorce was finalized in March 2024. Daniel got primary custody of Lily. Patricia got supervised visitation, 2 weekends a month. Not because the courts found anything wrong exactly, but because Patricia's therapist had flagged concerns, because Lily had started having anxiety episodes she couldn't explain, because something in the family dynamic had been declared unstable enough to warrant caution. I didn't know the details. Daniel didn't share them. I only knew that my granddaughter came home from her mother's some weekends quieter than she'd left, and that she had stopped asking to call Grandma Evelyn the way she used to. The September visit was supposed to be simple. Daniel needed to retrieve the rest of Lily's things from Patricia's rental house outside Chillicothe. Patricia had moved there after the divorce, closer to her mother's farm. He had a work emergency, asked me to go instead. "Just a pickup," he said. "Patricia won't be there. She'll leave the key under the mat. Lily wants to come because she left her stuffed rabbit. 1 hour, in and out. I brought Lily. She chattered the whole drive, told me about her 2nd-grade teacher, told me her friend Maisie had a hamster, told me she wanted to be a veterinarian or possibly a race car driver. She hadn't decided. She was the best part of every week I had. 7 years old with her father's stubborn jaw and her mother's careful eyes. We found the key under the mat. Patricia had left a box of Lily's things by the door, neatly packed. I was reaching for the box when Lily grabbed my hand. She hadn't been inside yet. She was still standing on the porch, looking toward the tree line at the edge of the property. About 100 yards back, half hidden by birch trees and overgrown hedges, was a red barn. "Grandpa," her voice was very small, "don't go in the red barn." "Why not, sweetheart?" She pressed her face into my side. "Nana says that's where bad things stay forever. The ones that can't leave." "What do you mean, the ones that can't leave?" She shook her head. She wouldn't say anything more. I took her inside, found the stuffed rabbit wedged behind the couch, loaded the box of her things into the truck. I should have left. Every sensible part of me said to buckle Lily into her car seat and drive back to Columbus. We had what we came for. The rabbit was recovered. My job was done. I looked at the barn. The ones that can't leave. I told Lily to stay in the truck. I told her to keep the doors locked and that I would be right back. She looked at me with her mother's careful eyes and didn't argue, which somehow made it worse. The path to the barn was worn down to bare dirt. Someone walked it regularly. The barn doors were closed but not padlocked, just a sliding wooden latch, the kind that weathered to gray in a few Ohio winters. I pushed it open. Inside smelled like old hay and motor oil and something underneath both of those, something I couldn't name at first. The space was larger than I expected. A workbench along one wall, gardening tools, a rusted chest freezer that looked 20 years old at least, boxes stacked to the rafters. In the far corner, almost hidden behind a tarp and 2 old tractor tires, there was a door. Metal. Not wood. Padlocked. I should tell you that I almost turned around. I'm a practical man. I don't open locked doors that don't belong to me. I don't investigate things that aren't my business. I built a whole life around minding my own business and letting other people mind theirs. Then I remembered the note in the crayon. That's where bad things stay forever. The handwriting of a 7-year-old who was trying very hard to spell it right. A child who had been coming to this farm for visits, supervised by a woman I had never fully trusted. I found a bolt cutter hanging on the workbench. The kind farmers keep for cutting wire fencing. Heavy, well-maintained. Someone used it regularly. The padlock was serious. A thick-shanked master lock. The kind you'd use on a storage unit or a shipping container. It took me 4 attempts and both hands. On the 5th try, it gave. I opened the door. The smell came first. Not decay, something chemical and dense, like a hospital corridor or a funeral home before the flowers cover everything. The room beyond was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet. Concrete floor, concrete walls. A single metal shelving unit. And on the bottom shelf, wrapped in plastic sheeting and sealed with tape that had yellowed at the edges, the shape of something that had once been a person. Small, child-sized. I could see the outline through the plastic. I did not unwrap it. I backed out of that room, pulled the door closed behind me, and walked as steadily as I could back to my truck. My legs were not entirely cooperative. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment with Lily looking at me from the back seat, her stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest. "You okay, Grandpa?" "I'm okay, sweetheart. I called 911. The police arrived in 11 minutes. I counted every one of them. I told the dispatcher what I'd found. I told them there was a child in the truck who needed to stay calm. The dispatcher was professional and steady and asked me to stay on the line and not touch anything else. I sat on the tailgate of my truck and held Lily's hand through the open window while we waited, and I tried to keep my voice normal and my face normal, and I failed at both. She knew something was wrong. She's 7, but she's sharp, always has been. She asked me if someone was in trouble. I told her some people were coming to check on something, that it was going to be fine, that she was safe. She leaned her head against the truck window and looked at the barn and didn't say anything else. The next 6 hours were the worst of my life, and I have had some genuinely terrible hours. 2 county deputies arrived first, then a detective from the Chillicothe field office, then more people in plain clothes with cameras and plastic gloves. A female officer named Deputy Cruz took Lily to a cruiser with the air conditioning running and a tablet loaded with children's shows and stayed with her the entire time. I sat on a folding chair someone produced and answered questions until my voice was flat. The detective's name was Warren Patel. Indian American, mid-40s, the kind of tired that settles in the eyes and stays there. He sat across from me with a notepad and asked me everything I'd already told the dispatcher, then asked it again a different way, then asked it a third way. I didn't mind. I understood why. Finally, he put the notepad down. "Mr. Caulfield, I need to ask you about the Marsh family, specifically about Evelyn Marsh and her son." I blinked. "Her son? Evelyn Marsh had 2 children, your former daughter-in-law, Patricia, and an older son named Marcus. Marcus Marsh was reported missing in October 1996. He was 11 years old. The farm. The property was Evelyn's. Patricia was renting a house on the edge of the same land. The barn was Evelyn's barn. They said he ran away," Detective Patel continued. "The family reported it as a runaway. There was an investigation. Nothing concrete turned up. The case went cold. Marcus Marsh has been listed as a missing person for 28 years. 28 years. I did the math. Patricia would have been 9 years old in 1996. She would have watched her brother disappear, watched her mother grieve, grown up in a house where a child had simply gone away. The ones that can't leave. How did Lily know? I asked. Detective Patel was quiet for a moment. We're going to need to talk to Lily, carefully, with a specialist present. But we believe Mrs. Marsh, your former daughter-in-law, may have brought Lily to the barn on at least one occasion. There may have been things said that a child would remember even if she didn't fully understand them. What kind of things? He looked at his notepad. We'll know more after we talk to Lily. Evelyn Marsh was arrested at her home 3 miles down the road at 4:17 that afternoon. She did not seem surprised to see the police. Witnesses reported she walked to the cruiser without being asked, sat down calmly, and said nothing without her attorney present. Her face, by all accounts, showed nothing at all. I drove Lily back to Columbus that evening. She fell asleep 20 minutes out of Chillicothe, rabbit under her chin, and I watched the Ohio highway unspool in the headlights and tried to arrange what I knew into something that made sense. It didn't make sense. Daniel met us at the door. He had already heard, had been in contact with Detective Patel since mid-afternoon. He looked like a man who had been hit by something he hadn't seen coming, which is exactly what he was. He hugged Lily for a long time on the front porch before she wriggled away and went inside to find the dog. Then he looked at me. I know, I said, because there wasn't anything else to say. Daniel and I sat at his kitchen table until past midnight while Lily slept upstairs. He told me things he hadn't told me during the divorce, things he'd only half understood himself. Patricia's anxiety, the way she never spoke about her childhood without smoothing it over, the way she became unreachable for days after visits to her mother, the nightmares she'd had their entire marriage that she refused to discuss, the way she'd once said, when Lily was very small and crying in her crib, that crying didn't help, that you learned that early or you learned it late, and it was better to learn it early. He'd thought she was just being pragmatic. He'd thought a lot of things. She grew up in that house, I said. I know, Dad. She knew about Marcus. He was quiet for a moment. The police think she may have known more than she said. They're talking to her therapist, trying to figure out what she actually knew and what she'd buried so deep she'd convinced herself it wasn't real. I thought about the Patricia I knew, the careful way she spoke, like every word had been weighed before it left her mouth. The way she apologized constantly, reflexively, as if apology were a reflex rather than a choice. The way she had spent our first Thanksgiving together watching Evelyn with the quiet attention of someone who is always monitoring the room for danger. Did she ever tell you anything? Daniel asked. No. But I think she tried to. I thought about small moments I hadn't understood at the time. A Christmas 2 years ago, when Patricia had pulled Lily close and held her too long when it was time to go to Evelyn's. The way she'd said, once, that some families have ways of handling things that look normal from the outside and aren't. I'd thought she was talking about my side of the family, some minor tension I'd missed. She hadn't been talking about my side of the family. The forensic results came back over the following 2 weeks. The remains were those of Marcus Allen Marsh, confirmed by DNA comparison with a sample from Evelyn. He had been 11 years old. Cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Based on preservation methods, the medical examiner estimated he had been killed within days of his reported disappearance in October 1996. The chemical smell I'd noticed was a combination of commercial embalming fluid and industrial sealant, applied in a way that suggested deliberate preservation rather than accident. Evelyn had kept her son's body in a locked room on her own property for 28 years. She had reported him as a runaway, had cried at the community searches, had accepted casseroles and sympathy from neighbors, from teachers, from the church she attended every Sunday, had raised Patricia in that house, on that land, with that room 50 yards from where her daughter played. Detective Patel filled me in on what they found during the search of Evelyn's house. Journals. Meticulous, organized. The kind of thing you'd expect from someone who ran a tight household. They read, by all accounts from the investigators who had to go through them, like maintenance logs, entries about what Marcus had done wrong, what Patricia had done wrong, what punishments had been applied and whether they had been effective. Clinical language, no emotion, as if she were documenting the repair of broken equipment. One entry, written the week before Marcus disappeared, described him as unmanageable, beyond correction. The entry after that was about the weather. The prosecutor would use those journals extensively at trial. Patricia was not charged. The investigation found no evidence she had known the specific contents of that room, no evidence she had participated in her mother's actions in any way. What they found instead was a woman who had grown up in profound terror, who had been raised to understand that bad children disappeared, who had organized her entire life around being good enough, quiet enough, small enough to stay safe. Her therapist testified that Patricia had fragmented memories of her brother's disappearance, had been told repeatedly that Marcus had run away, had spent 28 years partly believing it, because the alternative was something her mind could not accommodate. She had known something was wrong. She had buried it the way traumatized children bury things, deep and tightly sealed, and she had gone on living. At some point in the year before the divorce, Evelyn had taken Lily to the barn. Patricia hadn't known. She'd been inside the house. When Lily came back quiet, Patricia had thought the girl was tired. She hadn't asked. She told the investigators later that she had been afraid of what Lily might say, and even more afraid that she would recognize the answer. Daniel and I talked about that for a long time. I won't pretend I wasn't angry at Patricia. I was. She was my granddaughter's mother, and she had left Lily alone with a woman capable of God knows what, and had looked away when she should have looked directly. Lily could have been hurt in ways I didn't want to think about. She might still carry things we hadn't found yet. But I watched Patricia at the custody hearing, sitting across a courtroom in a gray cardigan, her hands folded in her lap, her face arranged in the careful stillness I had misread for years as coldness. She looked like a woman who had been surviving for so long she'd forgotten what living felt like. And I thought about that little girl who had watched her brother go away in October 1996 and been told he ran away, who had grown up in the house of the person who had taken him, who had been managed and monitored and shaped from childhood into someone who did not ask questions, did not make noise, did not draw attention. She was a victim of that woman too. Not the same way as Marcus, not the same way as Lily could have been, but a victim in the long, quiet, invisible way that takes decades to name. I didn't tell Daniel what I thought. He was too close to it and the anger was too fresh, and he had every right to it. But I held it in my own mind as something I needed to remember. Evelyn Marsh went to trial in the spring. The proceedings lasted 3 weeks. She sat at the defense table every day in clothes that looked like she was going to church, her hands folded, her face showing nothing. Her attorney argued diminished capacity. The prosecutor argued premeditation, obstruction, 28 years of calculated deception. The jury took 9 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, unlawful disposal of human remains, obstruction of justice, child endangerment for the exposure of a minor to the scene. The judge sentenced her to life without parole. She was 69 years old. She still showed nothing. Lily started therapy 2 weeks after the September visit. A child psychologist in Columbus named Dr. Frances Birch, who specialized in early childhood trauma. She had the kind of office that looked like a very well-designed playroom, and the kind of voice that stayed the same no matter what you told her. The nightmares started immediately. Lily would wake up in the dark, insisting there was a cold room somewhere and that she had to find it, that there was someone inside waiting. Daniel would hold her through it, remind her she was home, that the bad woman was in jail, that she was safe. Over and over, the same words, the same reassurance. By winter, the nightmares came less often. By spring, Dr. Birch said Lily was processing well, that children had a remarkable capacity for healing when they felt consistently safe and loved, that the most important thing was predictability. Showing up, being there the same way every day so the child's nervous system learned that safety was real and stable and not temporary. I drove to Columbus every Saturday. Daniel and I would take Lily somewhere, the science museum, the zoo, the park with the big fountain she liked to run through in summer. Ordinary things. Safe and boring and ordinary things. After a while, she stopped looking over her shoulder. She's doing well now. 8 years old, in 3rd grade, deep into a phase where she wants to learn everything about horses. She draws them constantly, fills notebooks with them, asked for her birthday whether she could take riding lessons. She talks more than she used to, asks more questions, laughs at things that aren't even funny the way children do when they've remembered that laughing is allowed. She still doesn't like enclosed spaces. She still checks behind her when she enters a room. Doctor. Birch says those things may soften over time or may simply become a part of who she is, a way her nervous system learned to read the world. We work around them, accommodate them, don't make a fuss. She'll tell us what she needs when she needs it. She asked about Marcus once, about 3 months after the trial. I was the one she asked, not her father, which I've turned over in my mind many times and still don't fully understand. We were in my backyard in October, raking leaves, and she stopped and looked up and said, "Grandpa, did Marcus ever get to come home?" I sat down on the porch step and thought carefully about what to say. "He did," I told her. "After a long time. He came home. Was he okay?" "He was finally resting," I said. "He'd been somewhere very cold for a long time, and now he was somewhere warm." She thought about that. Then she went back to raking. I did not go to Marcus's burial. I felt it wasn't my place. He was Patricia's brother, and Patricia's loss, and Patricia's grief, which she was finally being allowed to have after 28 years of being told there was nothing to grieve. The ceremony was small, I was told later. Just a few people. Patricia. Some distant relatives who had known Marcus as a child. A pastor who had never met him but spoke about rest and peace and the cruelty of secrets that outlive the people who keep them. I heard Patricia placed sunflowers on the grave because they'd been his favorite. That's the kind of specific detail that stays with you. I'm 63 years old. I retired from the electrical business 2 years ago. I spend most of my time with Daniel and Lily, some of my time in the woodshop I built in my garage, some of it on the phone with Carol, who moved to Phoenix after our divorce a decade ago and calls every other Sunday to talk about the grandkids. We get along better now than we did when we were married. That's a longer story for another time. What I want to tell you, what I keep coming back to, is the note in the crayon. "Grandpa Ray, don't go in the red barn. Nana says that's where bad things stay forever." My granddaughter was 7 years old. She had been somewhere she shouldn't have been told something she shouldn't have been told, and she carried that knowledge in her shoe for however many days until she could put it in front of someone she trusted. She didn't shout it. She didn't report it. She wrote it in crayon and hid it in her sneaker and waited for the right moment. That's not nothing. That's a child who had been paying attention, who had learned that some things need to be passed on carefully, quietly, to the right person. I think about all the adults who should have paid closer attention before that note ever became necessary. Neighbors in 1996 who heard things and looked away. A school that recorded Marcus's absence and filed paperwork and moved on. A community that accepted the story of a runaway boy and let Evelyn Marsh grieve in peace for 3 decades. Patricia, growing up inside that story, learning not to pull at the threads, and me. I sat across from Evelyn Marsh at a dozen family dinners. I noticed the way Patricia flinched. I noticed the way the air changed when Evelyn walked into a room. I noticed, and I told myself I was reading into things and I let it go. I don't let things go anymore. If there is a child in your life who starts sleeping badly, who stops talking the way they used to, who tenses up around a certain adult, who writes something in crayon and hides it in their shoe, pay attention. Ask the question you're afraid of. Make the call you've been putting off. Be the person who opens the door. I know that's uncomfortable. I know it feels like interference, like overreaction, like causing trouble where there might be none. I'm asking you to cause that trouble anyway. I'm asking you to be wrong and embarrassed and to apologize if necessary, because the alternative is a child who needed someone to ask and nobody did. Lily is in the living room right now. I can hear her talking to Daniel about horses, explaining something at length and with great conviction, her voice getting louder when he asks the wrong question. In about 20 minutes, she's going to come find me in the wood shop and tell me everything he got wrong and explain it properly. I'm going to listen to every word. Last month, she asked if we could plant sunflowers in the garden next spring. I asked her why sunflowers. She shrugged, the way kids shrug when they've already decided and don't need the reason understood. Just because, she said. I want something that faces the sun. We're going to plant them along the back fence, as many as will fit. We'll do it together, she and I, in the early May dirt when the ground finally warms up. I have never looked forward to anything more in my life. If you found this story, share it with someone who works with children. A teacher, a social worker, a pediatrician, a coach. Someone who is in a position to notice. The signs are almost always there before anyone looks. Sometimes the only difference between a child who gets found and a child who doesn't is one adult who decided to look. I almost didn't look. I almost took the box of stuffed animals and the rabbit and drove home. I am grateful every single day that I didn't.